Hey there, deep divers.
Huh.
Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our deep dives into fascinating topics. Today we're diving into something that's especially important if you're a UPSC aspirant, a student, or just someone who wants to keep up with what's happening globally. We're talking about the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, or as you'll hear us call it, the UNCBD.
It might sound like a bit of a mouthful at first, all those acronyms and international agreements. But believe me, the UNCBD is way more interesting than it might seem. It's basically this huge global agreement to protect the incredible diversity of life on Earth.
So imagine pretty much every country in the world coming together to say, hey, we need to protect our natural treasures. That's essentially what the UNCBD is all about.
Exactly. It all goes back to 1992, the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. Picture world leaders realizing, hold on, we're losing species, habitats are vanishing, we've got to do something. That's where the UNCBD was born. It's this legally binding treaty setting out a plan for countries to work together to protect biodiversity.
It's kind of amazing to think that it all started with people sitting around a table hashing out a plan to protect life on Earth. But why is this treaty so important? Why should we even care about biodiversity?
Think of it this way. Biodiversity isn't just about beautiful rainforests or exotic animals. It's the web that holds our planet together. It's the foundation of everything we depend on. Our food, clean water, even the air we breathe.
So losing biodiversity would be like pulling threads out of a tapestry. It could unravel the whole thing.
Exactly. And that's where the UNCBD comes in with its three core objectives. It aims to conserve biological diversity, promote the sustainable use of its components, and ensure the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from genetic resources.
That last part about sharing benefits from genetic resources sounds really relevant today, don't you think?
Absolutely. Think about it. Genetic resources can be incredibly valuable, especially for things like medicine and biotechnology. The UNCBD recognizes that these resources shouldn't be exploited, but shared fairly, especially with the countries and communities that have been taking care of these resources for generations.
It's about making sure everyone benefits from the amazing wealth of biodiversity our planet has to offer. Speaking of benefits, I read that India is playing a pretty big role in the UNCBD. Is that right?
Absolutely. India has been really proactive. They were actually one of the first countries to submit their sixth national report to the CBD. That shows some serious commitment. And they're not just talking about it, they're taking action. India is investing a significant amount, around 70,000 crores annually, in biodiversity conservation. And they're already exceeding some of their national biodiversity targets. Pretty impressive.
That's great to hear. So we've got this global treaty, the UNCBD, with countries like India taking the lead. But how does it actually work? It's not like there's a global biodiversity police force out there, right?
Right. It's more about encouraging cooperation and setting common goals. The UNCBD works through these big international meetings called COPs, or Conferences of the Parties.
So it's like a global biodiversity summit where all the countries come together to talk about strategies and goals.
Exactly. It's like a massive brainstorming session where everyone tries to figure out the best ways to protect the planet's biodiversity. One of the big outcomes of these COP meetings was the development of the Aichi targets.
Ah, yes, the Aichi targets. I've heard those mentioned a lot. What are those all about?
Imagine the Aichi targets as this ambitious to-do list for the planet. 20 specific goals set for 2011 to 2020. They cover a whole range of things, from tackling the root causes of biodiversity loss to promoting sustainable resource use, safeguarding ecosystems and species, and ensuring everyone benefits from biodiversity.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. Not just protecting individual species, but dealing with the bigger issues that threaten biodiversity as a whole.
Exactly. And to help implement these objectives and goals, there are three main protocols that provide the tools and mechanisms to make things happen on the ground.
Okay, so let's break down those protocols. What's the first one all about?
The first one is called the Cartagena Protocol. It focuses on regulating the movement of living modified organisms, or LMOs.
LMOs. That's a bit technical.
Basically genetically modified organisms, things like GMO crops. The Cartagena Protocol is all about making sure these organisms don't have unintended negative effects on biodiversity. Think of it as a safety net, ensuring that advances in biotechnology don't harm the planet's natural diversity.
So it's like a set of rules to make sure we're not messing things up with our fancy genetic engineering.
Exactly. Then there's the Nagoya Protocol, which focuses on making sure the benefits from genetic resources are shared fairly and equitably.
This one seems especially important when you consider traditional knowledge and indigenous communities.
Definitely, genetic resources can be super valuable. And the Nagoya Protocol tries to create a system where everyone benefits, including indigenous communities who have been the guardians of these resources for centuries. It's about recognizing the value of traditional knowledge and making sure those who have protected and nurtured biodiversity for generations are rewarded fairly.
So it's not just about conservation. It's about social and economic justice, too.
You got it. And it goes even deeper because it deals with intellectual property rights connected to genetic resources and traditional knowledge. For instance, imagine an indigenous community that's been using a specific plant for medicinal purposes for generations. If a pharmaceutical company develops a drug based on that plant, the Nagoya Protocol makes sure the community benefits from it.
That's amazing. It's like global recognition of the importance of traditional knowledge.
Right. It's acknowledging that indigenous communities have been at the forefront of biodiversity conservation for centuries and ensuring they aren't left behind in the race for profits from biodiversity.
So we have the Cartagena Protocol for biosafety and the Nagoya Protocol for fair sharing. What's the third one focused on?
The third one isn't really a separate protocol. It's more like an action plan. It's called the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020. It's the practical guide for how countries can implement the UNCBD's goals on the ground, turning those big ambitions into real actions.
So it's like the UNCBD's toolbox, giving countries the tools and strategies to make those biodiversity goals a reality.
Exactly. And to get even more specific, the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 set out 20 specific targets known as the Aichi Biodiversity Targets.
Okay, so we're starting to see how all these pieces fit together. The UNCBD as the overall framework, the protocols providing the mechanisms, and the strategic plan with its Aichi targets giving a clear roadmap for action.
Exactly. It's like a well-coordinated symphony with different instruments playing their part to create this harmonious melody of biodiversity conservation.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So we have all these pieces in place, but what does it really mean for us, the everyday people?
Well, practically speaking, understanding the UNCBD is really valuable, especially if you're into international relations, environmental policy, or even just being an informed citizen. It's definitely a hot topic in exams like the UPSC, but it's relevant beyond that too.
Absolutely. It's not just some academic thing. Biodiversity loss is a real issue that affects us all, even if we don't always realize it.
Think about it. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the medicines we rely on. All of it depends on a healthy and diverse ecosystem. Understanding the UNCBD and the challenges facing biodiversity is about understanding the future of our planet and our own well-being.
It's realizing that we're all part of this web of life. Protecting biodiversity is about protecting ourselves. Now, before we get too carried away with the positive side, we need to talk about the elephant in the room.
Ah, yes, the UNCBD sounds great in theory, but it does have its critics. Welcome back, deep divers. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the UNCBD, let's just appreciate how big this thing is. We're talking about a treaty signed by almost every country on Earth, all dedicated to protecting life itself.
It is pretty mind-blowing when you put it like that. But as we were saying before, even with the best intentions, there are always going to be challenges when you're trying to put such a huge and ambitious agreement into practice.
Definitely. Turning those big ideas into real results on the ground is a massive task. It's all about finding the right balance involving governments, industries, local communities, and individuals all working together.
So let's talk about some of those challenges. What are some of the criticisms people have about the UNCBD and how it's being implemented?
Well, one criticism that comes up a lot is that the Nagoya Protocol, while it has good intentions, can be pretty bureaucratic and might actually slow down research and conservation work.
I can see how figuring out all those access and benefit sharing agreements,
Mhm.
especially when you're dealing with traditional knowledge and genetic resources, could create some roadblocks.
Exactly. It's tricky trying to protect traditional knowledge while also encouraging scientific progress. Some researchers argue that all the red tape and potential legal issues might make people less likely to collaborate and slow down scientific discoveries, especially in areas like medicine and biotechnology.
That's a good point. We want to encourage scientific advancements that help people, but not if it means exploiting traditional knowledge or putting biodiversity at risk.
Precisely. It's about finding ways to use science responsibly while still respecting the rights and knowledge of indigenous communities. And it's not just about the Nagoya Protocol. Another big challenge is funding. Protecting biodiversity takes a lot of money, especially for developing countries that often have the most biodiversity, but not enough resources to implement conservation programs effectively.
So it's one thing to have these goals and protocols, but without enough money, it's like having a car with no gas.
Hmm.
You can have all the right intentions,
Yeah.
but you won't get very far.
Exactly. And while developed countries have promised to help financially, there are still debates about whether it's enough money and if it's being used the right way. We need more transparency and accountability to make sure the money is going to the right places and being used to get real results in conservation.
It sounds like a tangled web of financial mechanisms and ways to track if things are being done right. Not to mention, even if you have the money, there's still a huge task of keeping track of progress and making sure countries are doing what they said they would do.
Absolutely. It's easy to sign a treaty, but actually following through and turning those words into actions is another story. The UNCBD has ways to report and review things, but there are limits to how much they can actually enforce things. It depends a lot on countries doing what they promised and cooperating willingly.
So it's kind of like a giant group project.
Hmm.
Everyone agrees to do their part, but there's no way to force anyone to actually do it. It all
Yeah.
comes down to individual responsibility
Right.
and everyone being committed to the shared goal.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for groups like NGOs, scientists, and ordinary people to speak up, hold governments accountable, push for more transparency, and demand stronger action to protect biodiversity.
It reminds us that these international agreements, while important, are just one part of the solution. Real change happens on the ground, and it takes everyone working together, individuals, communities, governments, and organizations.
Right. It's about having conversations, being open and honest with each other, and finding ways to connect those big global goals with what's actually happening in different places.
So we've talked about the challenges and criticisms, but let's not forget that the UNCBD has also made some real progress in raising awareness and leading to positive action.
Absolutely. One of the biggest wins has been making people around the world aware of how important biodiversity is. Before the UNCBD, biodiversity was often seen as just a concern for scientists and conservationists. The UNCBD brought it into the spotlight, showing that it's not just an environmental issue, but also an economic, social, and developmental one.
It's about understanding that protecting biodiversity isn't just about saving cute animals. It's about protecting the systems that keep our planet alive and ensuring that everyone now and in the future can live well.
Exactly. And this shift in thinking has led to real actions. For example, we've seen a big increase in the number of protected areas around the world since the UNCBD started. These protected areas are crucial for conserving habitats and species. They're like safe havens for biodiversity.
That's encouraging to hear. So it's not all bad news. There have been some real positive outcomes from the UNCBD. Do any specific examples come to mind?
Definitely. The global ban on commercial whaling is a perfect example of how countries working together through agreements like the UNCBD can help protect endangered species. It shows what we can achieve when we all come together to protect vulnerable animals from being exploited.
That's a powerful reminder that we can make a difference when we work together. And it's not just about iconic species like whales. There have also been efforts to promote sustainable fishing practices to ease the pressure on global fish stocks.
Absolutely. Programs like eco-labeling and certification have popped up, raising awareness among consumers about the importance of choosing seafood that's caught sustainably. These programs empower consumers to make informed choices that support responsible fishing and contribute to the conservation of marine biodiversity.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Deep Divers, it's really cool to see how the UNCBD, even with the challenges, has managed to make real progress in protecting biodiversity.
Yeah, it really shows you what can be achieved through global collaboration when we recognize that the health of our planet is something we all share.
So we've talked about the good and the bad. But where do we go from here? What's next for the UNCBD?
Well, things are always changing, and the UNCBD has to keep up. They're constantly adapting to new challenges and opportunities. In fact, they're actually working on a new global framework for biodiversity. It's going to cover the period after 2020.
So it's kind of like a big update to the UNCBD's operating system, taking what we've learned and applying it to the future.
Exactly. The new framework aims to be even more ambitious and effective, setting new goals and actions for the next decade. It builds on what the Aichi targets started. It's a chance to fix some of the problems from the past and come up with better and stronger strategies for the future.
It's like hitting the reset button and saying, okay, we learned a lot. Yeah, let's use what worked, fix what didn't, and make an even better plan for the future of biodiversity.
That's a great way to put it. And this new framework is even more important now with climate change happening. We're seeing how climate change is affecting biodiversity every day, habitats changing, species going extinct. The new framework needs to tackle these issues directly and figure out how to make our ecosystems more resilient.
So we need to understand that climate change and biodiversity loss are linked, and we need solutions that address both at the same time.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that a healthy planet needs healthy ecosystems. Protecting biodiversity is crucial for dealing with climate change and adapting to its impacts.
It sounds like the UNCBD has a lot on its plate, but it also feels like there's a new sense of urgency and commitment to really making a difference.
Definitely. The stakes have never been higher. We all need to realize that we have to act now and we have to act together to protect the life that sustains us. The UNCBD, even with its imperfections, is still really important. It's a platform for coordinating global action and pushing for positive change.
It reminds us that even when things seem really difficult, international cooperation and a shared commitment to a common goal can make a difference.
For sure. And it's not just up to governments and international organizations, it's about each of us doing our part to protect biodiversity, whether it's supporting sustainable practices, speaking up for conservation, or making more informed choices in our daily lives.
Well said. It's a team effort, and every little thing we do can contribute to a healthier planet.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the UNCBD, remember that knowledge is power. When we understand these complex global agreements, we can have informed discussions, hold our leaders accountable, and push for change.
It's about recognizing that the future of biodiversity is in our hands. By working together, we can create a world where both people and nature can thrive.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to learn more about the amazing world of biodiversity conservation.
And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep into the issues that matter most to you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into fascinating topics. Until next time, keep exploring.